tell you, he has health care reform in his hand. He's got health care reconciliation in his hand. There is never a time when all of the things of this world that concern you and me are not in his hand. Oh, my brothers and sisters, he initiated his own coronation when he sent two disciples to procure the mount on which he would ride into Jerusalem. What a wonderful picture of genuine service. The two disciples, and interestingly, they are never named in any of the Gospels accounts. If you would just serve the Lord, and you must be willing to serve the Lord without attention. You must be willing to serve. If you will serve the Lord without desire of notice, if you'll just serve him without desire of spotlight, your name somehow gets mentioned. They may not call your name, but the service that you've rendered, if you've done it for God, it cannot go unmentioned. And here are two in the text whose names are not called, and your name is really not important. What's really important is, what have you done? And what happens in this text, it just simply calls them the two. You know what, church, if Jesus comes down to needing two, may not want to call names, but if he just needs two, wouldn't it be wonderful to be one of the two? I mean, he needs somebody to be obedient, and he needs two. I just want to be one of the two. If you would serve him, you may be obscure, you may be vague, you may be unknown, but God knows who serves him, and he also knows who does not serve him. The mother donkey in this story is brought along in order to induce her offspring to cooperate. Now, you know, there is a lesson there from the donkey. The mother donkey comes along to induce her baby to cooperate. Mothers and fathers, if you want your children, your offspring to act right, you got to act right in front of them. You can induce them to do the things that you do. The young colt would not easily have left its mother and would have been even more difficult to handle than donkeys normally are. But the mother colt induces him even to obey Jesus. Let's induce our offspring to obey Jesus. Jesus knew that the donkey had a colt would be where they were. He knew that this donkey and that colt would be where they were, waiting to be found by the two disciples. Jesus knew that the disciples would be questioned about taking the animals. And so he says in verse 3, if anyone says to you anything, then you tell them that the Lord needs them. Mark reports that some bystanders. Luke says that the owners began to question them. What are you doing with this donkey and this colt? And they responded the way Jesus told them, the Lord has need of them. You know what? Sometimes folk will ask you, why you always going down to the church? The Lord has need of me. Why you always busy in your ministry, why you're always busy visiting the sick, and why you're always in a meeting. And the Lord has need. There's some folk whose lives are dying and going to hell, and so God needs somebody who's willing to stand and say, here am I, send me, I'll go. And so the reason why you keep on singing, because the Lord needs somebody to sing. The reason why you keep clapping, the Lord needs somebody to lift him up. The reason why you keep praising, because the Lord needs somebody to keep praising. We also learned from these other two gospels that the coat had never been ridden. It was a gesture of respect. It was a gesture of honor. It was a gesture of good to offer such an animal to someone, as if to say, this animal has been reserved especially for you. I'm not one to talk about how people dress when they come to church. If my mother hears this CD, she'll roll her eyes at me. My mother believes, and my sisters believe, that everybody ought to just dress up and just put your best on when you come to church. I kind of believe that when Jesus said, whosoever will, let him come, if a three-piece is your best, then wear your three-piece. But I have discovered that everybody, one, don't have three pieces. I've also discovered that everybody don't want three pieces. Because you want and like, it doesn't mean that's what dressed up is for everybody else. But when I look at how they reserved this donkey especially for the Lord, I do believe that there's a difference in church clothes and party clothes. Now that I do believe. You don't have to dress like me, and I don't have to dress like you. But I do believe that people ought to be able to look at us and tell that we're not coming out of a nightclub. That's all I believe. That's all I believe. I believe that spaghetti. I better look before I say anything. Let me look. I don't want nobody to run out on me. I just don't think that church, I just don't think that spaghetti straps and church really go together. There's a place for spaghetti straps. I just don't think church. I just don't think church. I even think that even some of these stilettos. Well, I am supposed to know the name. I don't wear them. But I even believe that there's a church shoe. And then there's a shoe that makes you walk like you're not in church. You see, when you come to church, you ought to walk like you in church. I ain't gonna walk it now. But you ought to walk like you in church. You ought to be comfortable enough that you don't have to keep pulling. If you got to keep pulling it down. If you got to keep pulling it down. And you got to just keep. If you got to keep covering it up, there is a height. Since I'm here, I'm going to finish this one today. There is a level here that at some point is inappropriate. Somebody say amen.